Well, hello and welcome to the Sales and Marketing Director Incubator, the program that helps you make great career decisions and get the most out of your career journey. My name is Mike Dixon, Director of Sales, Marketing and Category Practice for AXR Recruitment and Search. In each episode this year, we're focusing on a theme. In our last session, we talked with Trish Pagorer about the amazing journey she's been on leading the runaway FMCG success story, Muti. And today we're going to discuss debate, how organizations are developing capability and talent for the future. Now, to ensure we really get under the hood of this important topic, I'm joined by Jeff McKenzie, Commercial Director of Pernod Ricard. Welcome, Jeff. How are you?
Morning, Mike. It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to our topic today to talk about capability, talent, leadership, amongst other things. So looking forward to our time together.
Oh, it should be great. And I know for you, Jeff, organizational development and high performance teams are major passions. As are diversity, health and well-being, a number of areas we might even touch on. But before we get into our topic in more detail, we thought we'd just get to know you a little bit better. So we'll jump into questions. Now, for those of you who are perhaps new to the live session, we've got a chat facility. So whilst I've got a whole bunch of questions, I'm going to ask Jeff if it's something you want to know, or is it we ask into a part of a conversation that you think is interesting and you've got a point to make, then please feel free, and I'll do my best to get to the chat questions as we go. But let's start with a question I'm going to ask every guest this year, Jeff, which is, what's your favorite brand? And you can't pick a Pernod Ricard brand.
Okay, it's a really tricky one, and not being a classic marketeer, I've tried to think a little bit left field. So I'm going to take a bit of license today. The brand that I'm going to go with is Ash Barty, the brand. And I think the reason I've chosen Ash Barty is I think she really is a brand. She's completely relatable. She's just a normal person doing great things. And I think that, she's inspiring a generation of older and younger people. So I'm going with Ash Barty. I don't know if that answers the question or the brief, but Ash Barty is my brand.
I think that's a really good answer. I mean, people are brands. You talk about personal branding all the time, actually, and I think she's just authentic. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love the way that she conducted herself throughout, certainly the Australian Open, but through tournaments. I just think that she doesn't try to be anything else other than herself. And I think that's really inspiring to me. So I'm just a massive fan of hers. I'm disappointed that she's finishing tennis, but it's somewhat not surprising either.
Yeah, let her get on with it. I just loved at Wimbledon when she was doing all the. She got the presentation. She was sitting in the media briefing afterwards just with a beer. I thought it's just like
this is very authentic, isn't it?
Well, have you ever seen another Wimbledon champion do that before? It's really cool. It's cool. Okay, next question. Who would be the most interesting leader in the world to work for?
Okay, I'm going to answer this question in two parts. I'm going to give a bit of a story about an interesting leader I've worked for in life, and I'll also answer your question around interesting leader. So for all my Pernod friends out there, a story about a leader or manager really of days gone by many years ago and no longer with us. But I worked for a manager who probably has really built part of the person I am today. They were brutal. They were really, really tough on me, particularly in presentations where we spent a lot of time presenting to the executive team many, many years ago in my role back then. This person was disruptive, very, very rude, really berated me in front of all of my peers and the executive team in many of these presentations. And I just, it really broke me down. But what I learned from that at the time was that it taught me to be really, really prepared. No matter what environment you go into, do your preparation, have a very clear understanding of what you're there to present and why you're there to present it. So that one was a really big one for me. It was a tough time for me at the time because I was much more junior, but a great learning experience. Part two of the question is interesting world leader. Now, I'm trying not to be cliche, but there's someone who I've been reading up a lot on, and I call her a world leader, which would be Brené Brown. And I just love her views on leadership and how modern they are. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't read much or heard of Brené Brown, look her up, because her views on leadership and the modern day organization are fantastic around courage. In particular, vulnerability for leaders, I think, is a huge one. And just her general concept of leadership, I think, is quite forward thinking. So I'm going to say Brené Brown.
Yeah, I think she's great. I follow her on LinkedIn. I've known about her for years. I've read some of her stuff. I mean, that whole vulnerability-based trust is what she's very well known for. But she's very active on LinkedIn, so it's worth following. Yeah, cool, good choice. Okay, let's get into you and your career, Jeff. And everyone's had your bio; it's been sent around, so I'm not going to dwell too much on the roles you've done. But obviously, today is about unpicking your experience a little bit, and then taking that experience, your views, and I've got plenty as well on organizational development and talent. So, but before we get into that, what is it you do? Give us your elevator pitch.
Oh, so this is probably a bit of a shout out to the comms team at Pernod. I would like to say we sell fun, but it's probably politically incorrect. But working for Pernod R has been a huge part of my life, and we work in an industry which is the drinks industry. It's an unbelievably cool, fun industry, and so what do I do? I'd like to, I guess, my elevator pitch would be that certainly as a leader in an organisation, but also the drinks industry, I'd say we create an environment and experiences for people to come along and express themselves individually, achieve amazing things collectively in a business, and really have fun. And I find that if we can do that and create that experience for employees or candidates, I generally find people have a wonderful experience in our organisation, but also the drinks industry. So I'd say, and sell fun. So based off that, would you come and work for me?
That sounds good. I like fun. That's all right. I'll do it. As long as you get to play golf occasionally, I'm good with that as well. And this will kind of bridge us a little bit to our topic today. But given what you described in terms of the Pernod Ricard business, Jeff, how do you connect your people to the business in terms of mission and purpose?
Yeah, so this is a really, really tricky one. And you and I have discussed this a little bit around, it's partly about inspiring the people, but it's also going to touch on some of the topics in a moment around capability. And so how do you inspire people or link them to the mission or purpose? So I'm going to go back a little bit of a story about Pernod Ricard, and because I think it really resonates with me, is Paul Ricard, our founder. He had a saying way back, when he established the company in 1932 around, he had this idea and concept of make a new friend every day. And it's actually scrawled in cursive writing across our bar down in Barangaroo here. And what it really resonates with me is really about connection with people and just actually being with people, being very social. So that's the first part. And then the other purpose, I think, which is really our mission in Pernod Ricard, is, and it's sort of spoken in French, but I won't try and do that. It's really around creators of conviviality. And I find that's a very unique purpose within our organisation. I know many great organisations out there have a purpose of their own, but for us, it's creators of conviviality. And what that really means is just being together in a social environment. And it's around family, friends, work colleagues. And I actually find that really lives through the way we work in our business. It's part of the culture, which we'll talk more about shortly. So I really love that. And so that's really the mission and purpose. There's a strategy part to that as well, which is probably much more complicated. And I think from our business perspective, it took us a little while to really work that part out, because strategy can mean many different things. But what I guess, cut a long story short, once we realized and really understood what our objectives and our strategy was, how we connected everyone to that was we just had a massive level of communication through every part of the organization. And, to everyone out there, I think, we tried to consult our employees a lot during the strategy process. So it wasn't just developed, showcased to them, and now go and do it. We actually tried to bring people on the journey of the strategy. And to this day, I still think the success of that is born in the idea that people can recite back to you what your strategy is. And for everyone in Pernod, for us, it's our battlegrounds and enablers. So everyone can recite those back. So I think that's really how you connect people to certainly your purpose, but also your strategy.
That's a very convivial approach.
It is a convivial approach.
Okay, so let's get into our topic of the day. Now, society for all of us has gone through huge change in recent 2 years, particularly through COVID. But I think more just, even in the years leading up to that, we were seeing big changes in terms of consumer behavior, shopper behavior, and so forth. So in the whole kind of FMCG world, we've had to kind of adapt quite a lot. But do you think businesses have kept up, first of all, strategically, and then in terms of people and structures?
Yeah, okay. So strategically, I think that we're still playing catch up. We really are. And, certainly across the FMCG world, and I know there's organizations out there which are wonderful and are probably ahead of the game, but I'll use a generalization for our discussion. So I think we're really playing catch up. And the reason is a number of things. I think that our partners across every sector of the drinks industry are rapidly evolving. Additional to that, data in terms of how it's utilized and optimized and maximized in organizations is a huge effort, organizational effort. And we're still trying to work out how to best do that. And then I also think COVID has changed the game. You mentioned the challenges, but it's also, I think, really evolved the entire FMCG industry where, as fast as things were before, things have, the pace has increased again.
Yeah.
So I think that we're trying to keep pace. People and structures. The people side of things, I actually think that, from certainly talking to my industry peers, we're making progress, through the Drinks Association, Serendus Mentoring, some of these programs that are available. I really do think that from the people side, we're making big inroads. Structures is a different story though. And I still think, and certainly speaking for our organization, and we're reviewing all of that consistently now, is how are we structured? And it's really about how we show up to the customer externally as well. And organizations are structured somewhat differently, but we still have very traditional structures in place today. So we're always looking at how do we start to align our structure that best fits the customer, and how do we become more customer centric? And we don't always get that right, but we're always thinking now about how do we change and tweak things here so that the way we go to customer is much more in the style of the way the customer wants to work with us. And so I think their structures are still quite traditional in the modern sense. And I guess you as a recruiter, part of your role would see that. I think we've actually got to start to shift and change and evolve that and think more openly about how we engage the customer across the organisation, moving from that classic bow tie approach to a much more matrix engagement. And we're certainly trying to do that in Pernod as well.
It is interesting. I see it every day, and it's actually confusing people a little bit because the traditional career paths then change, and the pathway forward. Particularly if you look at the sales function, today is the sales and marketing director incubator, and deliberately we brought them together this year. We ran them separately for the last two because we see a blurring of the lines as career paths have to be more matrix and interlinked in order to develop future leaders. Because if you just sit in your lane in a function, the reality is you're not developing the breadth of skills required in today's business. And I think businesses aren't sure how to kind of create structures to accommodate that, but there are some noticeable changes. For example, if you look at sales, the jump between a national account manager and what's next is really confusing for some people, because what do you do next? Because the role of national business manager has been delayered at a lot of companies. And you've got this new role evolving, which is like a head of customer type role, which is actually almost like a mini general manager, which is looking after different parts of the business, which is in theory what a NAM does as well. You got this salespeople are more like mini general managers now, but where do they develop that breadth from? If they just stick as a salesperson, they're probably not going to get that head of customer role. So they get to national account manager on a perfect path and go, what next? So I think companies and people are a little bit confused or uncertain as to the best way to go about it. But it's really interesting to see how we also as recruiters, I think, have an obligation to try and challenge people and companies on their thinking too.
Yeah, well, I mean, structures are flattening as well. They're sort of delayering a little bit. So, those traditional hierarchies are changing somewhat. And my experience or first advice is that, we see that, those potential jumps, the classic promotions that you used to get from NAM to MBM and up through the business aren't always there. However, with flattening of structures and becoming more lateral, it's actually allowed us to build more experience as well. And actually, to your point, move across the organization. And we've still got to challenge our own thinking to know that salespeople can move into marketing, can bring a creative element and a commercial skill to marketing. And likewise, for example, marketing people into sales brings a completely diverse view again. So, we've had one of our staff, we recruited someone who was from an HR background, and they brought this wonderful human skill to the role. So it's actually a real game changer for that particular role for us as well.
And that person went into a sales role?
Absolutely, yeah. So it came from a very different background. We just really liked what we saw in that person in terms of their potential, the capability, the skill set, the experiences that they've had. And we brought them into the organization, and they've been doing very, very well because they just bring a very different view, not that classic sort of sales view, which has come from, traditional structures per se. So, but that works across the board. And I think the more we experiment, the more we work with bringing in diverse skill, the better off we are, because we just get this great eclectic mix of talent and views and ideas. And that's what we're trying to create, through, diverse thinking. You've got to recruit for that, but you've got to build it within your business as well.
Come on to the recruitment in a session, because I was obviously very interested in that. But so if you look at that talent development piece, Jeff, so what do we do? How do we develop that talent?
Yeah, the talent development one is one I spend a lot of time on with my HR business partners and our entire team, because that's sort of the crux of that. Is we look at all of our employees as talent. Now, that's sort of like a very broad brush approach, but we do, because out of that, you've got everyone making their own journey. So how do you recruit for talent? Well, I'll give you an example of how you're developing talent. I'll take you back a step down memory lane. For those of you who've been around as long as I have, the traditional talent or training type programs were that you'd come into a role, you'd be doing a good job, you'd get sent off on a course. It might be an external course, might be internal. You come back, you continue to do well in your functional role, doing really well, and then you get promoted. You go on another course. So you're building all these linear experiences that are relative to your role. And then what happens, or has happened, and again, generalizing a little bit, is that you get promoted, and and some people are very successful. But what we also find is that some individuals get promoted off the back of their functional expertise, and so therefore they haven't really developed their behavioural or leadership expertise, and they struggle in those more senior roles. So that was a very traditional path, and again, generalizing. But now what I find we're trying to do is actually build experiences out. We're trying to actually look at our talent in terms of not only your functional expertise, but we're trying to understand your behavioral expertise, and then we overlay that with your leadership capability. And so now we actually train and educate and build capability around all of those. So it's gone from being just very traditional in that functional set to, I think, now really branching out to including capability development, very much leadership development as you move into the more senior roles. And we've got to provide for the playground or the environment to enable that, because that's what starts to build capability in an organization.
Yeah. I think if you look at talent and if I assess individuals that I do every day in terms of how promotable are they, how far do I think they can go? Used to be the case of, you're only this old, you've got to this level, wow, you're on the fast track. But actually that's almost a hindrance now, because you're going too fast. You've actually, the real smart ones are those who are taking it more slowly, and they are deliberately seeking out broadening roles at each step. So rather than kind of going step up, step up, step up, they're going step up, step sideways, step up, step diagonally sideways, and as lateral as they can to develop that kind of to ensure the platform maintains that breadth. But I think it's incumbent on businesses to, on the one hand, be really encouraging of that. And not to be so linear in their thought process, which is, I think, a big challenge, because I think, to a point, we're not there yet. But then also when it comes to recruitment, I think it's easier to do that when you're inside a business. What companies, in my experience, are not warm to yet is that lateral move externally, because you take a risk on somebody, don't know this person, they interview quite well, but they're looking for a national account manager role, but they're currently in brand management. Why would you take that risk? And so it's highly unlikely if I was to shortlist somebody as a brand manager or an AM role, they're going to really get the job. Whereas I'd love to think in a few years' time that would be a more normal thing to happen.
I completely agree with you, Mike. That I've got certainly experiences of the fast track experience, and I think that's the human ego part of that as well. Is we want to be progressing our career as fast as we can. That presents challenges to you, but you're spot on around. That's how we're still traditional in the way we sometimes view candidates, is that we look at these quite traditional experiences. So you just mentioned for marketing, you're looking at a marketing role, so they've got brand management experience. So they sort of come into the short list of the pool. But we then exclude all these people who've got maybe these wonderful thinking styles or these wonderful leadership behaviors that we've maybe eliminated along the way. And I think organizations, certainly us, are trying to test more for that. So how do we actually broaden our line of sight? How do we open up our thinking around talent so that, you're not just bringing in, the external marketing talent to fill the marketing roles, or the external, sales experience to fill your sales roles is how do we actually, like I said, bring an HR background who's very people oriented because, we're in a people business. So, we don't always get it right, but I think we're trying to stretch that much further now. And I'd love to think that some of my commercial team would go into marketing roles because I think it'll benefit their careers enormously and vice versa. I'd like to think that we've got that cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Big job to be done still, but we're on the journey.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at sales teams then, Jeff, how have they adapted in terms of this whole concept of, changing consumer behavior, customer expectations?
Certainly changing expectations from a sales team perspective. The consumers absolutely changed in the last 2 years through COVID. So we know that. And we've got the insights that certainly confirm that. Our customers have also changed. Their expectations of us are growing, and as they should be. With all of our major partners, they're expecting more from us. And I think they're expecting more from us from a capability perspective. So they want more out of their key partners in terms of how we show up to them. And they want us to actually problem solve with them. They don't just want us to sell them stuff. And I find more of the conversations that we're having with all of our key partners are how we solve problems for them. And if you can't solve the problems for them, they'll move on to the next partner. And so as you talk around, the sales evolution, you talk around the NAM traditionally being the one who sells. I sort of, it's a little bit cliche, but someone gave me a great analogy. They're becoming the conductor of the symphony. They've got to get all the pieces of the organization and how it shows up to the customer right. And they're the ones who actually understand where to bring them in. And I find that when we do that really well in our business with our key partners, I find we just get a much better outcome because we've got the experts at the table. So we actually bring in an entire organizational approach that's actually butting up to the customer, not just our commercial team who are very talented, but not always a specialist. So I find that, bringing in a more diverse view and actually understanding and meeting the customer needs through problem solving with them, you're going to get better outcomes.
Yeah, again, it talks that evolution of role, as which has obviously been driven by the demands of customer. If you start to kind of look forward, what changes do you think are coming our way?
Oh, far out. I think we've seen the pace of change of the last 2 years has been scary, and we're all struggling to keep up. I think that we're just trying to understand how to actually get ahead. And now I think that organisations are getting to that point where data is becoming, that we're working with data daily and how to understand it and to use that. The big challenge is how do we build competitive advantage in our organisations? How do we actually set ourselves up for the next 3 years of success? And I know that we're thinking about it, but coming through COVID, we've had impacts in hospitality, so a major impact to our organisation and the industry. At the same time, we've had this retail sector that's been fairly buoyant. So we're trying to understand also now about what does growth look like? Where do we get that from? Because getting it is not going to be the same way as maybe historically in the past. The fact that we need to be more agile, and I think our customers are expecting, they're saying, come on, keep up with us. We'll help you get there, but you've got to keep up with us. And I think they'll partner up with the organisations that are agile, again, problem solving, and who really can help them grow their business. Now you might say, well, isn't that the past? Yes, it is, but I think there's becoming more, a much greater light shone on, those organisations that can actually really harness all of those things together, including data, and actually deliver great outcomes and insights to their customer.
Who leads the change? Because I'm always interested in this in terms of every organisation sees it differently, but I think you have people in businesses who lean in and love change. Yeah. Others are going to wait for it to happen, right? Yeah. But is it the role of HR to look at organizational development in particular, or is it senior leaders like yourself, or if you're a more junior member in the business, do you have a part to play?
The answer is yes to all of them. I think it starts with the leadership, but it's not entirely our total responsibility. We're accountable for that. So I think that from an organisation perspective, it's up to the entire organisation to change. So our role as leaders is to be able to create the environment and create the motivation and the space for organisations to change. So HR have a role around capability, and we'll talk a bit more around capability development, but also cultural change. So it starts, again, from the leadership, but it's got to be through the organisation. There's no point just having leaders who are engaged in change and then they haven't actually been able to bring that through the entire business. So I think to answer your question, it is everyone's role to drive change in the business. It's really hard to do, by the way.
Yeah.
You've got to engage your staff. Like you have to engage them in a way in which they feel consulted, like they're on the journey. There's a reason for doing it. And so therefore, if they don't support it, then what you get is this disconnect in your business where you've got a leadership or senior level of business which is driving or pushing forward, but then you've actually got a broader part of the business which is actually not with you because you haven't been able to successfully sell them. And I mean sell in the right way, is convince them that change is a good thing. And so I think you've got to make sure you're keeping very, very close eye on all those internal metrics around engagement, motivation, your culture. Is everyone on the same page? Because when you see that, that's when the magic happens.
Looking at Pernod, Ricard, and when we've talked about the society changing, how we adapt, talent's got to develop. What are you doing at Pernod in terms of that whole talent development piece and ensuring that you're kind of creating these future fit leaders going forward? Because it isn't easy.
No, we're a large organization, but we've struggled with it. Very open to say that. I think a couple of things we've done is we brought in the right resource, so specialist resource in talent acquisition. So we had brought in some external resource, and by the way, she's amazing. The lady that I'm working with right now, Julie, shout out to you out there, who's amazing in helping us find those different talent pools. The second thing, and probably one of my most passionate topics right now, is this organizational capability. And you and I were talking a bit this morning about that. It's incredibly hard to get. So we touched on talent. So you've got talent, and again, we see it as broad, but let's talk around the identified potential who get a lot of that focus around fast tracking their careers. But to be ultimately successful as an organization, you need to have an organizational capability to lift. So the entire organization capability needs to go from here today to being much more savvy and sophisticated tomorrow. So the question is, how do you do it? Well, an example of what we're doing is we realize that certainly in the commercial team that there is still a gap between what is great across total FMCG, looking at the top tier organizations and what they're doing versus what we were doing and where we're at. So we've got really great, talented people. We've got a wonderful culture, which is highly engaged. We lack that level of capability. So what we've done is implemented a commercial academy. We're working with Real World, so shout out to the guys there on a 3-year partnership around helping us to develop organizational capability where our entire commercial organization will go through not only training, but we will embed all of that training through a huge change management plan, and then we'll come back and test it. And so we'll actually do a proper M&E. We'll test all the metrics on, are we actually improving our capability in the organization? We use things like the Advantage Group report and all these other really feedback loops, certainly internally, how engaged our people are, how consulted they feel about the changes we're making. But the most important thing is that we lift the rising tide, lifting all the boats type example, is that down the track, we actually have an organization which is going from being, I think, great today, but being best in class, over time. And that's going to take time to do it. And that you've got to give yourself time to do that because it doesn't happen overnight. So we'll bring in new talent, we'll train our existing talent, and then hopefully with all that coming together, we actually build an organization that's set up for growth for the next few years.
Great. And that's pretty progressive, it's structured, it's well thought through. Other businesses might be at different stages of their journey. What advice would you give to individuals who are perhaps thinking, that's great, where am I in this journey? In my business, I get the sense there's change coming. Maybe it's not as structured as you're going through at Pernod, Jeff, but what advice would you give to the individual in terms of the contribution they can make in getting themselves ready for what organizations need to be working like in the future, the role that they can play at an individual level?
Yeah, this is probably one of my really favorite passion points or passion topics, Mike, is really leadership and personal development. And the advice I'd give to anyone out there, whether you're junior and you're just starting off and trying to find your way through the organization, or whether you're at mid-tier, so you're trying to work out how do I make the step into the most senior levels, or if you're at a senior level and you're wondering what do I do next. I think from my perspective and what I've learned is you've got to be really curious, and you've got to be curious for yourself. So that's one thing. The second is, talking around career plans, be really flexible, but have a plan. The amount of times I've worked with or come across individuals who have great ambitions, but they actually don't have a plan on how they're going to get there, and they're not sure, and there's a lot of self-doubt. So what happens is they sort of either get pushed around the organization because the organization sets up roles for them, or they actually, you know, sort of sit in the same role and they don't know where to go. And so part of my job is helping certainly all our talent, but anyone who's interested, is how to help define what's interesting to them. You know, how to actually they understand what are their career ambitions, but what are the things they need to do. And that's the gap today, I think, in terms of, you know, taking real accountability for your own career, is actually doing something about it. It's not enough to have a goal to get to, you know, the head of or the business manager. You have to be doing something for yourself. You've got to be growing in your role, and you've got to be building and collecting experiences, but be flexible. Because the amount of times in my own career where I've had disappointment, either due to timelines not being met in my ambition, or I didn't get the role that I wanted or was going for. But you've got to reset and actually then recheck, and it just consistently rebalance what you're doing. And I find if you can do that and be open, you're actually going to be much more open to what's going on in the world, a bit of a sort of call out to the universe, and funnily how things come along when you're open. But I guess the message I want to leave with everyone out there is do something for yourself. Don't just wish it or want it. You've got to be growing and learning all the time. And that's the biggest advice I give to anyone, is work on your own development. It is not the responsibility of the company as much as we want, you know, training courses.
Yep.
It's just not. And as an organization, our responsibility is to provide you with the opportunities, or provide you with an environment or an experience opportunity, but you've still got to take it. And so I hope that, you know, if you take one thing out of today, dive in, own your career development. That's really important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The biggest question I ask in any interview, interestingly, is around, it's a classic interview question, which is around, you know, you used to be afraid, you know, what's your weakness or whatever, but we now talk it much more cleverly, you know, what is your key growth area or whatever. But the reality, what you're really asking is one, do you take personal development seriously? Do you listen to are you open to feedback? Because I want to know where you've understood your own development, and actually, you know, what are you doing to mitigate the impact of the negative component of not being good at something, and how are you getting better at it? And it's actually a very, very multi-layered question, but people kind of often give a glib answer. And I think, oh, this is the biggest part of the interview. And I signpost it here. This is the biggest part now. I want you to really hear it. I want to go deep. And I go too fast or whatever. I'm going, no. It's not good enough. But so it's really important, that whole piece on development. Now, I also want to touch on something that kind of it frustrates me a little bit around the development of future talent. So if I look at, for example, the whole kind of FMCG, CPG world, you know, where does the talent of the future come from? Because we're talking about an evolution in terms of organizations, which mean that roles have to change in a good way. And I think the NAM role is a perfect example of how much a role can develop over time and it requires such a breadth of skills, EQ, IQ, technical skill mix. It's such a different role to what it used to be. But you know, when we've got fewer people coming into the industry, where do the NAMs of the future come from? And what do we do about that? And there's fewer direct sales teams. You still have one. There's fewer grad programs. Those that do exist, they are hiring one grad here, two grads there. There's not this volume of people coming through anymore.
And this is what, you know, I mentioned, Julian, our acquisition team, we've got to go find them. So they don't just come to you and drop in to your lap. I wish they did sometimes, but you've got to go find those new talent pools. And so as organizations, we've got to be thinking outside the box around, let's use the NAM example. So sourcing NAMs. So, you know, you can look across other organizations, you know, within the same industry, within FMCG, but you're still largely shopping around in that cohort. So how do you building talent for tomorrow is thinking really differently about the role. And you just mentioned on some of those skill sets around how do you, you know, there's one thing to sort of, we use this analogy in our business, you know, you can build it, borrow it, or you buy it, and how we look at talent. And you need to do all three. And so with the NAM role example, it's really understanding what are the needs of the future. And I think we do a lot of looking back around, well, this is what the role, the PD says, so therefore we recruit in that way. And so this is where the opportunity of diversity comes in around seeking out those different pools, you know, so universities, but not just those doing a business administration degree, but what about an arts degree? And so we start to look at, you know, take it right back to what are the skills and the qualities and the capabilities and behaviors we're seeking. So outside of the specific role experience, what's the type candidate that we're looking for who can help deliver. Because what we then do is we bring them through what we're doing now is the commercial academy, and we'll train them. So we'll train them. So the commercial acumen, have they got high IQ and have they got high EQ, which I think is important, certainly in our NAM roles. Have they got the base skill? Okay, maybe they don't, but they've got all these other boxes ticked. What potential they've got. So let's bring them in and we bring them through the academy and we'll train them on those skills. And what we get then is a curated talent. And I'm really excited by, that journey, because you're actually starting to source talent from pools that are maybe alternative to your competitors. And I think that's what helps build a competitive advantage and a very highly talented and capable organization. Yeah.
I love when I meet candidates who've done it differently. There was somebody who I interviewed just a couple of days ago for a role, and she's in a reasonably senior category leadership role now, but she's only been in category for 2.5 years because her background before that was finance and was consulting. And has found her way deliberately, actually, and she wanted to get into category, but she didn't want to get there quickly. So she did these different things. I thought, so refreshing. She's high potential, by the way. So she's, and it's just nice when you meet people who are doing it differently. They're the exception still. So therefore, what you're doing, I think, is still the exception. But I think we have to think in those terms, given what we're seeking now in terms of the skills and capability to do the roles of the future.
I agree, and you would have seen it more than me, Mike. They just bring a more worldly view as well from all the different experiences that they've had. So I think that absolutely that when you get talent that's really different and they've got potential, grab onto them.
Question in from the chat from Jade. Jeff, you spoke about the importance of personal development in order to move through your career path. In what ways are you working on personal development, and how do you go about prioritizing?
Yeah, really good question. I still work on my personal development, even though I'm at a senior level of business. It doesn't stop. I had an old line manager once who gave me a great piece of career advice, and he'd said, Jeff, very simply, right, you'll get lots of advice in your career, but here's one that really still sticks with me. He said, if you're not growing anywhere, you're not going anywhere. And I just, the simplicity of that is really profound to me, because it really is about, to the question here, you've got to be working on your own personal development. So what I work on right now is I've just completed my company director's qualification, because it gives me further skills in senior financial management, organizational governance and risk. So those are relevant skills and requirements for my role. Me and my team, or my management team, we listen to a thing called the High Performance podcast. So it's, a group that was put on me by one of my staff. I just love it. So I'm learning a lot about high performance. We bring in some of those into our leadership discussions. So I spend a lot of time, certainly on podcasts. There's so many things you can do, Mike, and you'd probably be able to build on this even more than I could, around, your own development doesn't need to be sitting in a classroom. Actually your own development is on the job, and I think that's where you get the most richness, but we forget to do it sometimes. And so you've got to take, again, responsibility for yourself and really go after those, those key learning opportunities. What are the gaps and weaknesses? And I certainly got a lot of those that I'm still trying to work on. So you might have something you can add to that.
Yeah, I think the people who are excite me the most are the ones who are really active and busy around their own development, and they're very vocal about it. So it's a shared agenda. They talk with their business about it. They talk with their colleagues about it. They have multiple mentors that they work with. It's not just one. Because if you've got one mentor, that's great, but that becomes a coach if they're if they're do it all for you. You should be picking groups of mentors for different components of what you want, and that might mean you work with a mentor for 6 months, and then that you've developed that space for them. So I think it's almost like a portfolio approach to your own personal development. And I think we have got access today to that kind of insight from so many different sources. Podcasts is and the media is great as well. I know a very good podcast called Your Future in Sales and Marketing, which is this podcast.
Isn't it rated in the top 4 HR podcasts you explaining?
Funny you should mention that, Jeff. Yes, it is. top 5 in Australia. But actually, we have a number of bonus episodes on this, which actually talk to specific learning topics as well, as well as the live sessions we do with sales and marketing directors and MDs. So, but there are so many things out there you can do. But I think it's a proactive mindset. It's a busy mindset. And when I ask that person that question on their development needs and what they're working on, I get such a rich answer, because they're able to kind of go, well, let me tell you, what I'm not good at is this, and this, but this is what I'm working on. So one I can't fix, but this is how I'm working around it. Two I've almost fixed, and three I'm at the start of that journey. But last year it was different, and they're always evolving. So it's that ability to articulate it based on their self-awareness, but their ability to reach out to a network and maintain an active network, which becomes their mentor group, and they're just hungry for information.
You mentioned coach and mentors, and I find, and I'll be a bit of a vulnerability. When I first got myself a coach, I was probably a little bit more ego driven around. I had a coach, and I thought that was pretty cool. But when I really worked it out, that the value of what someone can do to help you, and again, another piece of advice for everyone out there is, I still have a coach and a mentor today that I use regularly. They're different people, and my only counsel to everyone would be, find someone who is not necessarily agreeable with you, because it's easy to have someone who will pat you on the back and tell you you're doing a good job and you're doing all the right things. But it's actually going to be confronting when you've got a coach who's pushing you into very uncomfortable territory, that they are able to see your challenges, and if you build a level of trust, the vulnerability that you show. And when you're showing that to someone and then they're pushing you out of your comfort zone, that's where the growth happens. It doesn't happen with having a coach and that's great. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. In my experience with anyone that I have coached or have been coached by, the quality of the conversation always comes when you're the most uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And when you're feeling really out of your comfort area. And I've been pushed in those places, and it's the sort of the uncomfortable truth.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It's easy just to seek, I guess, praise and people, like-minded people who are going to tell you you're doing a good job. And we all need a bit of that. We all need to be told, we're good. Yeah. But that, being out your comfort zone is where development comes from. Yeah. Otherwise, you just, staying in the same place. It's like people ask me, why do you go trail running as opposed to running on the road? I say, because every step's different on trail. Yeah. And therefore, it's a better workout, as opposed to every step being the same. It's easy. So different things, but we're getting towards the end. But one question I wanted to finish on, because I've not asked this to anybody before, Jeff, but and I'm interested to see if you might answer it. What relationship should an individual have with a recruiter?
Oh, okay. Gosh, my Pernod boss is out there. If you're probably a bit nervous about this one.
Yeah. Hazel, our producer, you can press pause now.
No, let's answer the question. I think that I've always had, I have a number of relationships with recruiters, including yourself, and they're incredibly positive. And I find that when you meet, recruiters offer a valuable service. I should be probably you call it more than that, a valuable service to the industry in terms of placement. But more importantly, you're an incredible earner of knowledge. And I really would encourage anyone to just have a relationship from the purposes of, we've talked today about change, capability, talent, leadership. Well, when you think about it, recruiters sit at the forefront of all of that. And why? Because you've got a lens into all these organizations you're working with. So you see organizations for what they are, when you're interviewing and briefing on roles, etc. So I always find my conversation with you are incredibly rewarding, because we talk about this capacity to change. And I think you need information to do that as well. What's going on out there. And so part of your networking, I would say, is with recruiters, and certainly my relationships are this way, is actually sharing of information around what we're trying to do, because you can potentially help us find talent out there. But at the same time, I can understand what's going on out there. And I find that you're a valuable source of that information. And certainly when you build trusted partnerships or relationships, that I find you're a valuable part of the entire industry, not just for your placement service, but I think more importantly, you guys sit at the center of change and you understand what's driving it, who's doing it best, what you need to do. And certainly my more recent capability discussions that we've had in our business, which have resulted in, I think, an enormous change management program, came through a conversation with recruiters about what the industry was doing and where it was changing. So I would say only positive.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think I mean, I'm not just seeking gratification there, Jeff, but but the purpose behind asking that question is, I hope you would probably talk in broader terms, which you have, other than the core of what we do, which is place people in roles and fill vacancies for companies. But for me, sometimes when we're working with people, perhaps in a junior to mid career, they see the recruiters as someone they need from time to time to create their next role opportunity, and therefore the conversation is a little bit transactional, and actually they miss the opportunity to go deeper. And my advice would be to those who are say in their earlier career stages, seek out recruiters, whether it's us at AXR, there's plenty of other good ones out there, who you can have a conversation with, which doesn't just help you in your career planning, but helps you in your job. So, and those conversations are, they're iterative, they happen over time, and it helps you develop relationships over years, because we've been here a long time, we'll be here for a long time going forward. And there's a benefit to that. So if a recruiter calls you, it's not just a pesky recruiter calling you for a job. Actually, that person, if you rate them and they're good at what they do, bring them into your network. And make sure you build on that, and you take the calls from time to time as well.
I would say you hit the nail on the head for me, Mike, which is build them into your network as part of your broader network. We didn't talk a lot about that today. Maybe we need to do a part 2. But build them into your network so that they become part of the fabric of what you're doing around your own career. Because I've had relationships with recruiters for over 10 years. I'm still at Pernod and I still love what I do, but I've found that they still add another bit of a light and shade to what we do. So they're only been valuable to me.
Yeah, great stuff. Jeff, that's been awesome. We're just slightly over time, but that's my fault. I asked a complicated question at the end. But thanks for sharing everything today. Really interesting topic to get into. We could easily have done another 45 minutes on that. We probably haven't done it full justice, but I think we brought to light some really interesting points for the guys to talk to and listen, think about and absorb and be conscious of how that relates back to their own career pathways and career decision making going forward. Now, for those of you on the live session, thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks again, Jeff. That was wonderful.
It was enjoyable. I thought I might completely bugger it up, but I actually really enjoyed just the conversation, and hopefully everyone took something away from that. It's been really fun to be here. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Guys, next up in the Sales Marketing Director Incubator is Andrew Sutherland. Now, Andrew's the managing director of a consulting firm called Lightswitch. I've known Andrew for many years. I placed him way back in the day. In fact, his wife Olivia is coming on later on in this series. She's the CMO for Krispy Kreme. So Andrew's got an impressive sales and marketing background, a lot of tier 1 companies, but he's going to talk about his role as a consultant, and effectively what he sums it up. He helps organizations speak retail, which is interesting. So we'll be recording his episode on April 28th. If you'd like to join us, or subscribe to the podcast, which I shamelessly plugged earlier on, Your Future in Sales and Marketing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google. You can listen to any time or reabsorb what we talked about today for those in the live session. Thanks again, Jeff. That was brilliant.
Pleasure.
Thanks everyone for listening, and have a great day.
Have a great Easter, everyone.